Roy Sullivan, the human lightning rod. Some people are afraid of spiders, others of heights. Roy Sullivan, a U.S. park ranger in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park, had a much more elemental fear. He was afraid of the entire sky, and for good reason. The sky, it seems, had a personal, deeply unhealthy obsession with him. Over a span of 35 years, Roy Sullivan was officially struck by lightning a record-breaking 7 times. This isn't just unlucky. It's a statistical middle finger from the cosmos. The odds of being struck by lightning once in your lifetime are around 1 in 15,300. The odds of being hit 7 times? You'd have a better chance of winning the lottery, getting eaten by a shark, and discovering a new primary color all in the same afternoon. Roy's story is a harrowing, darkly comical testament to a man who became a human dartboard for the gods. His toxic relationship with thunderclouds began in 1942. Sullivan was on duty in a fire tower, a structure practically designed to taunt lightning. A storm rolled in, and the tower, lacking a proper lightning rod, was struck repeatedly. Roy decided quite reasonably to get the hell out of there. He didn't make it far before a bolt found him, searing a half-inch strip down his right leg and blasting his big toenail clean off. It was a brutal opening act. For the next 27 years, the sky left him alone. He likely thought it was a one-time affair, a freak encounter. He was wrong. It was just a cooling-off period. In 1969, the universe decided to rekindle the flame. Roy was driving his park truck along a mountain road when a bolt struck 2 trees on one side of the road. Before he could process that, another bolt hit a tree on the other side. The electricity, now trapped between the trees, saw only one path forward, through the open metal window of Roy's truck. The strike knocked him unconscious, burned off his eyebrows and eyelashes, and set his hair on fire. The truck, driverless, rolled to a stop just short of a cliff edge. When Roy came to, his head was a smoldering mess. This would become a recurring theme. Just a year later, in 1970, the sky got him at home. A lazy Saturday afternoon, tending his garden. A bolt shot out of a clear blue sky, hitting a nearby power transformer. From there, it leaped to his left shoulder, searing it and knocking him flat on his face. The strikes were getting more personal, more intimate. In 1972, it happened again. He was inside a ranger station trying to do his paperwork. A bolt hit the building, setting it on fire. Roy later said he heard a sizzling sound right before his hair caught fire again. He began to believe some force was actively trying to destroy him. He wasn't wrong. He started carrying a can of water with him at all times, just in case. Strike number 5 came in 1973. Roy was out on patrol in his truck when he saw a storm cloud forming. He recognized its look. He floored it, trying to outrun the storm. He later recalled that he thought he'd escaped it. Then, he felt an overwhelming urge to stop the truck and get out. The moment his feet hit the ground, the bolt struck. It hit him on the left side of his head, traveled down his leg, and blew his shoe off. He crawled back to his truck, poured his can of water over his still flaming head, and drove away. The paranoia was now a constant companion. People started avoiding him, terrified of being collateral damage. He spoke of how, if he was walking with friends and thunder rumbled, they'd scatter in fear. The 6th strike in 1976 was arguably the most vicious. He was at a campground checking on a noise complaint when a small, angry cloud seemed to follow him. He tried to run, but the bolt caught him, injuring his ankle and, you guessed it, setting his hair on fire for the 3rd time. This was the final straw. He retired from the Park Service. He moved into a trailer home with his wife, surrounding it with lightning rods, hoping to create a demilitarized zone. It didn't work. In 1977, Roy was simply trying to enjoy a day of fishing. A storm appeared out of nowhere. The bolt hit him directly on the crown of his head. It traveled through his body, burning his chest and stomach. As if being flash-fried by Mother Nature wasn't enough, as he stumbled away from the pond, a black bear appeared, intent on stealing the trout from his fishing line. Sullivan, having been electrocuted 7 times by this point, had had enough. He summoned the strength to hit the bear with a tree branch and fight it off. It was the 22nd time he'd fought off a bear in his career. Being struck by lightning 7 times while also fending off 24 bears isn't just a life, it's a rejected action movie script. Roy Sullivan's story ends not with a bang, but with a quiet, tragic whisper. In 1983, at the age of 71, he died by his own hand. The official reason was a broken heart over unrequited love. But those who knew his story wondered if it was the culmination of a life spent looking over his shoulder, a life of profound loneliness, targeted by a force he could neither understand nor escape. He was the man the universe couldn't kill, but it certainly made his life a living hell trying. Violet Jessup, the woman who refused to sink. In the grand, chaotic lottery of existence, some people draw the short straw. And then there's Violet Jessup, an Irish-Argentine ocean liner stewardess and nurse who seemed to have a season pass to the 20th century's most infamous maritime disasters. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a recurring character in a trilogy of catastrophe. To call her Miss Unsinkable feels less like a cute nickname and more like a profound understatement. She didn't just survive the sinking of the Titanic and its sister ship, the Britannic. She was also aboard their other sister, the Olympic, when it suffered a crippling collision. The universe tried to sink Violet Jessup 3 times, and 3 times she simply refused the invitation. Her unlikely career as a disaster magnet began in 1911. Violet, a young and dedicated stewardess for the White Star Line, was assigned to the brand new RMS Olympic, the largest civilian liner in the world at the time. It was the pinnacle of luxury, a floating palace. On its 5th voyage, just off the coast of the Isle of Wight, the Olympic had a rather aggressive meet and greet with a British warship, the HMS Hawke. The Hawke, designed to ram other ships, slammed into the Olympic's side, punching 2 massive holes in its hull and crippling its propeller. For any other ship, it might have been fatal, but the Olympic, built like a fortress, limped back to port. The incident was a major financial disaster for White Star Line, but for Violet, it was just a dress rehearsal. She was shaken but unharmed, her brush with maritime mayhem just an interesting anecdote for her memoirs. Despite this traumatic experience, she wasn't deterred from a life at sea. When White Star Line was crewing its new, even grander vessel, the RMS Titanic, Violet's friends convinced her it would be a fabulous experience. She was hesitant, but the allure of serving on the most famous ship in the world was too strong. She signed on. You know the rest of this story. On the frigid night of April 14, 1912, the unsinkable ship had its legendary argument with an iceberg. As chaos erupted, Violet's training kicked in. Being a devout Catholic, she first recited a prayer in her cabin. Then, she went on deck to help guide the non-English-speaking passengers, who were utterly bewildered, towards the lifeboats. She was ordered into Lifeboat 16. As it was being lowered, a ship's officer handed her a baby to look after. She clutched the infant, watching in horror as the magnificent vessel she called home slipped beneath the waves. After 8 terrifying hours in the freezing dark, she and the other survivors were rescued by the RMS Carpathia. It was only then, safely aboard the rescue ship, that a woman, presumably the baby's mother, ran up, grabbed the child from her arms, and disappeared into the crowd without a word. One would think that after surviving a collision that crippled one unsinkable ship and the maiden voyage sinking of another, a person might consider a career in, say, accounting, or alpaca farming, anything on dry land. But Violet Jessup was built differently. When World War I broke out, she enlisted as a nurse with the British Red Cross. Her new assignment? The HMHS Britannic, the 3rd and final sister ship of the Olympic and Titanic, now converted into a hospital vessel. The irony was apparently lost on the White Star Line. In 1916, while sailing in the Aegean Sea, the Britannic was rocked by a massive explosion. It had struck an underwater mine. The Britannic, despite being more robustly designed than the Titanic, sank in just 55 minutes. The descent into chaos was swift and brutal. As Violet jumped into a lifeboat, she watched in horror as 2 other lifeboats were sucked into the ship's still-turning propellers, shredding them and their occupants to pieces. Her own lifeboat was being pulled toward the same gruesome fate. She had no choice but to jump overboard. Her thick, life-preserver-like cork belt did its job, but as she surfaced, her head slammed into the keel of the lifeboat. She was pulled from the water by another boat, concussed and bleeding, but alive. Years later, suffering from severe headaches, she went to a doctor who x-rayed her skull and confirmed she had sustained a major fracture during her escape. 3 sister ships, 3 calamitous events, 1 woman at the heart of it all. Violet Jessup didn't just have bad luck. She was a statistical anomaly, a focal point for maritime misfortune. Yet she saw it differently. She didn't see herself as cursed, but perhaps as blessed. She survived each time. After the war, she returned to work for the White Star Line and later other cruise lines, completing a 42-year career at sea before finally retiring. Her story isn't just about surviving disasters, it's about an unshakable resilience, a quiet defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The sea tried to claim her 3 times, and each time she calmly and professionally said, "Not today," and went about her duties. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the man who saw 2 suns. On August 6, 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi, a 29-year-old naval engineer, was having a profoundly bad day. He was in Hiroshima on a business trip for Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and it was his last day. He was ready to go home to his wife and infant son in his hometown of Nagasaki. As he was walking to the shipyard one last time, he heard the drone of a single aircraft in the sky. He looked up. At 8:15 a.m., the sky was torn open by a silent, blinding flash of white magnesium. The world's first atomic bomb had just detonated. Yamaguchi's story is not just one of luck, good or bad, but a testament to the unimaginable horror of the atomic age and the sheer, stubborn refusal of one man to die when history demanded it. He is the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government to have survived both the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings. The force of the little boy bomb threw him into the air like a rag doll, ruptured his eardrums, and temporarily blinded him. He landed in a potato patch, the left side of his body seared with severe burns. The mushroom cloud blotted out the sun, plunging the world into an eerie twilight. Disoriented and in agony, he wandered through a city that had, in an instant, become a hellscape. He was surrounded by the walking dead, people with their skin melting off, buildings reduced to smoldering skeletons. He found 2 of his colleagues who had also survived, and they spent the night in an air raid shelter, listening to the city burn and the cries of the dying. The next day, against all logic and medical advice, he made his way through the rubble-choked streets to a train station. He was desperate to get home. He boarded a train packed with other burned and bewildered survivors and began the long, painful journey back to Nagasaki. He arrived in Nagasaki on August 8th, a ghost returning to a world that had no idea what was coming. He went to a hospital, but the doctors, unfamiliar with atomic burns, treated his wounds as if they were conventional. He was bandaged up and sent home. The next morning, August 9th, despite his horrific injuries, he reported for work. He had to tell his bosses what he had witnessed. He walked into his office at Mitsubishi and began recounting the unbelievable story of a single bomb that had vaporized a city. His supervisor was skeptical, accusing him of being mad. "A single bomb?" his boss scoffed. "That's impossible." At that exact moment, at 11:02 a.m., the landscape outside the window dissolved into another searing white flash. The Fat Man had arrived. Yamaguchi was once again thrown to the ground by the blast wave. His office was closer to this hypocenter than he had been in Hiroshima. He later said he thought the mushroom cloud had followed him from Hiroshima. His bandages were blown off, and he was hit by a new wave of cancerous radiation. But miraculously, his pre-existing injuries from the first bomb were not immediately worsened. He had now survived 2 nuclear detonations in the space of 3 days. He rushed from the collapsed building to find his family. His home was destroyed, but he found his wife and son alive, huddled in a shelter. They had been out looking for burn ointment for him when the bomb fell, a twist of fate that likely saved their lives. The double dose of radiation took its toll. His hair fell out, his wounds turned gangrenous, and he vomited incessantly for weeks. But he endured. He didn't just survive, he lived. He became a father to 2 more children after the war. For most of his life, Yamaguchi was quiet about his unique, horrifying experience. He didn't want the attention or the label. But as he grew older, and as his own children began to suffer the effects of second-generation radiation exposure, he felt a duty to speak out. He became a vocal advocate for nuclear disarmament, traveling the world to share his story. He spoke at the United Nations, pleading for the abolition of the weapons that he had twice looked in the eye. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a witness, a living embodiment of humanity's most self-destructive impulse. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died of stomach cancer in 2010 at the age of 93. His life is a story of almost impossible odds. He was in the wrong city at the wrong time twice. He could be called the unluckiest man in the world. Or perhaps he was the luckiest. He survived 2 suns, 2 man-made apocalypses, and lived to tell the world that it must never, ever happen again. Frans Salak, the conductor of calamity. Most people go through life trying to avoid disaster. Frans Salak, a Croatian music teacher, seemed to conduct it like a symphony. His life story is a 7-part concerto of catastrophe, a series of near-death experiences so absurdly frequent and varied that it feels less like bad luck and more like a cosmic slapstick routine. He was the Wile E. Coyote of the Balkans, constantly walking away from explosions, crashes, and falls that should have been his final curtain call. And then, after cheating death 7 times, the universe seemed to shrug, give up, and just hand him $1 million. The overture of his unlucky opera began in 1962. Salak was riding a train from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik. The train, for reasons still unclear, jumped the tracks and plunged into an ice-cold, raging river. 17 passengers drowned. Salak, however, was pulled to safety by a fellow passenger. He escaped with a broken arm and severe hypothermia, but he was alive. It was a harrowing 1 in a million event. For Frane, it was just the warm-up act. 1 year later, he was on his first and only plane ride. He was flying from Zagreb to Rijeka when a door blew off the aircraft mid-flight. The plane, now depressurized and crippled, went down. Salak was sucked out of the open doorway into the open air without a parachute. 19 people on the plane died in the crash. Frane, however, landed in a haystack. A massive, perfectly placed haystack. He woke up in a hospital with minor injuries, the sole survivor of a plane crash he wasn't even technically in when it hit the ground. Landing in a haystack after being ejected from a plane sounds like something from a cartoon, but for Frane, it was just another Tuesday. The universe decided to give him a 3-year break, perhaps to reload. In 1966, he was on a bus that skidded off the road and crashed into a river. Yes, another river. 4 passengers drowned. Salak, having had prior experience with impromptu aquatic landings, swam to shore with a few cuts and bruises. By this point, his friends had likely started taking the stairs. Then came his automotive phase. In 1970, his car caught fire as he was driving. He managed to leap out just seconds before the fuel tank exploded, turning the vehicle into a fireball. 3 years later, in a different car, a faulty fuel pump sprayed gasoline all over the hot engine, and flames shot through the air vents, burning off most of his hair but leaving him otherwise unharmed. You'd think he'd start walking, but the universe had other plans. In 1995, he was hit by a bus in Zagreb. He sustained minor injuries. A year later, in 1996, he was driving on a mountain road when he rounded a corner and saw a UN truck coming straight at him. He swerved. His car crashed through the guardrail and plummeted 300 feet down a gorge. But Frane wasn't in it. He had been ejected, not wearing a seatbelt, and managed to grab onto a tree on the cliff's edge, where he watched his car explode far below. 7 major, life-threatening disasters. A train, a plane, a bus, 2 car fires, a pedestrian accident, and a cliff dive. He had faced down death by rail, air, road, fire, and gravity. The universe had thrown everything it had at him. And then, in 2003, it happened. The punchline to the longest, most violent joke ever told. Frans Salak, at the age of 73, bought a lottery ticket for the first time in 40 years. And he won. The equivalent of about $1.1 million. He bought 2 houses and a boat, but the money didn't bring him happiness. He gave most of it away to friends and family, claiming that all he needed at his age was his wife. He said he was the luckiest man in the world. And who could argue? You could see him as the unluckiest man for having to endure so much. Or you could see him as the luckiest for surviving it all. His life poses a strange question. Is it better to live a quiet, uneventful life, or to dance with death 7 times and walk away with a winning lottery ticket in your hand? Anne Hodges, the woman who was hit by a star. On November 30th, 1954, Anne Hodges of Sylacauga, Alabama, was doing what many people do on a lazy afternoon. She was napping on her couch wrapped in a quilt. The world outside was quiet, the day unremarkable. And then, a piece of the cosmos, a 4.5 billion-year-old traveler from the asteroid belt, decided to end its long, silent journey by crashing through her roof, ricocheting off her radio, and slamming into her hip. Anne Hodges holds a unique and painful distinction. She is the only confirmed human being in history to have been directly struck by a meteorite. Her story isn't one of repeated bad luck, but of a single, astronomically improbable event that turned her life upside down. The object that hit her was a fragment of the Sylacauga meteorite. It had entered the atmosphere as a brilliant fireball, seen by people across 3 states. But while others saw a spectacle, Anne experienced a violent home invasion from outer space. The impact left a massive, dark, pineapple-shaped bruise on her side, but miraculously, it didn't break any bones. The initial confusion was immense. She and her mother, who was also in the house, thought the chimney had exploded or a plane had crashed. It was only when they saw the hole in the ceiling and the blackened 8.5-pound rock on the floor that the bizarre reality began to sink in. The aftermath was a storm of media attention and a bitter ownership dispute that was arguably more painful than the impact itself. Anne and her husband Eugene believed the space rock belonged to them. It had, after all, entered their home uninvited and assaulted Anne. But their landlord, Bertie Guy, also laid claim to it, arguing that since it fell on her property, it was hers. The case went to court. The U.S. Air Force even flew in, confiscated the rock to confirm its extraterrestrial origin, and then handed it back, leaving the humans to squabble over it. The public was fascinated. Anne Hodges became a minor celebrity, a reluctant, starstruck woman. She was flown to New York to appear on a game show. But the fame was a burden. The legal battle dragged on. Anne, who was already a nervous and anxious person, found her health deteriorating under the stress. Eventually, they settled with the landlord, paying her $500 for the right to keep the rock. By then, the public's interest had waned. They had hoped to sell the meteorite to the Smithsonian or another museum for a small fortune, enough to repair their roof and pay their medical bills. But a year had passed. The best offer they could get was far less than they had hoped for. Frustrated and disillusioned, Anne Hodges decided she was done with the celestial intruder. She donated it to the Alabama Museum of Natural History, where it remains on display today. The meteorite didn't just bruise Anne's body, it bruised her life. Her newfound fame put a strain on her marriage, which eventually ended in divorce. She suffered from persistent health problems and lived a quiet, reclusive life until her death from kidney failure at the age of 52. She never recovered from the bizarre incident. She felt the rock was cursed, a harbinger of trouble. Her story is a strange cautionary tale. The odds of being hit by a meteorite are so infinitesimally small, far smaller than being hit by lightning, that it's considered a statistical impossibility. For Anne Hodges, that impossibility became a painful, life-altering reality. She was the one person in billions chosen at random by the universe to have a direct, violent encounter with a piece of another world. A cosmic collision that left a scar far deeper than the bruise on her skin. Jean Rogers, the cascade of calamity. If you think your life is a series of unfortunate events, you've never met Jean Rogers. Her life wasn't a series, it was an avalanche. A relentless, multi-decade cascade of such profoundly bad luck that it borders on the surreal. She wasn't just struck by lightning, she was struck twice. She didn't just have one freak accident, she had a whole collection of them. Her story reads like a divine comedy of errors, where the punchline was always her own suffering. Jean's bizarre relationship with misfortune started early. As a child, she was with her father on a miniature golf course when a bat flew down, attacked her, and got tangled in her hair. It was a strange and frightening but isolated incident. Or so she thought. It was merely the opening act. As a teenager, she was on a cruise with a friend. While her friend was taking a photo of her, Jean leaned back against what she thought was a railing. It wasn't. It was an open hold. She fell 2 stories down into the ship's dark interior, miraculously surviving with only minor injuries. Then came the lightning. Her first strike occurred when she was boating with her family. She was holding onto a metal pole when the bolt hit, throwing her into the water and leaving her with burns. Most people would take this as a sign to perhaps avoid open water and metal objects during storms. But lightning, it seemed, wasn't done with her. A few years later, she was at home simply trying to close a window during a thunderstorm. A bolt struck the house and traveled through the metal window frame, zapping her again. She was knocked unconscious but survived. Lightning had found her twice. But it was about to get even crueler. The universe decided to start targeting her loved ones. Her husband was struck by lightning while opening his car door. He survived. Then her son was struck while standing in their yard. He also, thankfully, survived. The Rogers family had become a dynasty of lightning targets. But her misfortunes weren't limited to electrocution and falls. She seemed to attract all manner of bad luck. She was mugged. Her house was nearly destroyed by a runaway truck. She slipped on a freshly waxed floor at work and broke her hip. At one point, she was even being interviewed for a TV show about her unbelievable string of bad luck. As she was recounting her stories, she tripped over a camera cable and broke her other hip. You cannot make this stuff up. The universe had a sense of irony, and it was all at Jean's expense. She documented her litany of woes in a book titled The God Who Fell from Heaven. She developed a philosophical, almost humorous outlook on her life. She had to. The alternative was to crumble under the weight of it all. She became a case study for television shows and magazines, the poster child for inexplicable misfortune. What's fascinating about Jean's story is the sheer variety of her bad luck. It wasn't one recurring theme, like Roy Sullivan's lightning or Frans Salak's vehicle-based disasters. It was everything. Gravity, electricity, animals, criminals, simple clumsiness. Every potential source of chaos seemed to have her number. Her life raises a profound question about the nature of luck. Was she truly a cosmic magnet for disaster? Or was she perhaps just exceptionally accident-prone in a way that attracted increasingly bizarre circumstances? Or maybe, just maybe, she was actually the luckiest person alive. She fell down a ship's hold, was struck by lightning twice, had her family members struck, was attacked by a bat, and endured countless other injuries, yet she survived it all with a story to tell. Her life wasn't defined by the misfortunes that befell her, but by her incredible ability to endure them, get back up, and somehow keep on going. Eric Nory, the nature magnet. Some people are one with nature. Eric Nory of Florida is more like nature's favorite chew toy. His story is a jaw-dropping chronicle of a man who has been on the receiving end of nature's most violent and unlikely attacks. A shark, a lightning bolt, a rattlesnake, and even a troop of aggressive monkeys have all tried to take a piece of him. His life is a powerful argument for staying indoors, preferably in a reinforced concrete bunker. Eric's first major brush with nature's fury came in the form of a lightning strike. He was a teenager, standing in a field in central Florida, a state famous for its electrical storms. A bolt struck a tree nearby, and the electricity arced through the ground, hitting him and throwing him through the air. He survived, but with the telltale burns and a newfound, very healthy respect for thunder. It was a 1-in-a-million shot. Little did he know it was just the start of his involuntary punch card of natural disasters. Years passed. He got married, had a family, and lived a relatively normal life. Then, in the summer of 2013, he was spearfishing in the Bahamas. He had just speared a grouper when a large shark, likely a Caribbean reef shark, decided it wanted the fish more than he did. The shark lunged, not for the fish, but for Eric's leg, taking a huge bite out of his calf. He managed to fight it off, swim back to his boat, and was airlifted to a hospital in Miami. The attack was brutal, leaving him with a massive crescent-shaped scar and a terrifying story. As he was recovering, the media picked up on his story, and his past encounter with lightning came out. The headline was irresistible: "Man bitten by shark, also struck by lightning." At this point, his luck was already in the realm of the absurd. But nature wasn't finished with him. Just a few years later, he was taking out the trash at his home when he was bitten by a venomous eastern diamondback rattlesnake, one of North America's most dangerous snakes. He was rushed to the hospital and received anti-venom, saving his life but leaving him with another story of improbable survival. And then came the monkeys. While on a trip to visit his in-laws, he was attacked by a troop of monkeys. While the details are less life-threatening than his other encounters, it adds a layer of comical absurdity to his story. A shark, a lightning bolt, a rattlesnake, and a monkey attack? It's as if every animal on the "will absolutely ruin your day" list decided to take a crack at him. Eric Nory's case is a fascinating study in probability and perception. He is a living, breathing statistical anomaly. To be the victim of any one of these events is rare. To be the victim of all of them is almost unthinkable. He has been bitten, struck, and mauled by the very forces of nature most of us only see on television. Yet through it all, he has maintained a remarkably positive outlook. He credits his faith and his family for his resilience. He doesn't see himself as unlucky. In fact, he sees the opposite. He survived a shark attack in the middle of the ocean. He survived a lightning strike. He survived a venomous snake bite. From his perspective, he's not the man nature keeps trying to kill. He's the man nature can't seem to finish off. His scars aren't signs of bad luck. They're trophies of battles he has won against the wildest forces on the planet. Walter Summerford, the posthumous grudge. The story of Major Walter Summerford is perhaps the most bizarre and macabre tale of bad luck on this list. It's a story that suggests some grudges are so deep they extend beyond the grave. Summerford, a British officer in World War I, was a victim of lightning not once, not twice, but 3 times during his lifetime. That alone would put him in a very exclusive club of the cosmically cursed, but it's what happened after he died that elevates his story from merely unlucky to supernaturally weird. The universe, it seems, wanted to make absolutely sure it had the last word. His first encounter with celestial fury was in 1918. Major Summerford was on horseback, fighting in the fields of Flanders during the final months of the war. A bolt of lightning descended from the sky and struck him. The blast killed his horse and threw him to the ground, paralyzing him from the waist down. It was a devastating, life-altering injury that ended his military career. He was forced into an early retirement and moved to Vancouver, Canada, to live out the rest of his days. He spent the next 6 years rebuilding his life, confined to a wheelchair. He took up fishing as a passion, finding solace by the local rivers. In 1924, he was sitting under a tree by the riverbank, enjoying a day of fishing, when a storm rolled in. Lightning struck the tree he was leaning against. The bolt traveled down the trunk and into his body, this time paralyzing the entire right side of his body. The man who had already been targeted once by a bolt from the blue had been found again, thousands of miles away 6 years later. Incredibly, Summerford did not give up. He spent the next 2 years recovering, and against all odds, he regained the use of his legs. He was no longer paralyzed. He could walk again. He cherished his newfound mobility, spending as much time as he could outdoors, walking through local parks. In 1930, 6 years after his second strike, he was walking through one such park on a bright summer day. A storm cloud appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. A lightning bolt shot down and struck him for a third time. This one was different. It didn't just injure him, it shattered him. The strike caused a complete and permanent paralysis and led to a rapid decline in his health. He struggled for 2 more years before finally passing away in 1932. His family mourned him, laying him to rest in the Mountain View Cemetery in Vancouver. They likely thought his long, tortured battle with the heavens was finally over. He was at peace. The sky could no longer hurt him. They were wrong. 4 years later, in 1936, a storm raged over Vancouver. A bolt of lightning descended from the sky, shot down into the cemetery, and struck a single object with pinpoint accuracy: the tombstone of Major Walter Summerford. The stone was destroyed. This final, posthumous act of atmospheric vengeance is what makes Summerford's story so chilling. 3 strikes in life, 1 in death. It defies all logic and probability. It feels less like a series of random events and more like a targeted, relentless persecution. Was it just an unbelievable coincidence? Or was there some strange, unknown property about Walter Summerford that made him uniquely attractive to atmospheric electricity? We will never know. But his simple, shattered gravestone stands as a silent monument to the man who was so profoundly unlucky that even in death, he couldn't escape the storm. John Lyne, the calamity magnet of Cornwall. If bad luck were an Olympic sport, John Lyne would be a multi-gold medalist for Great Britain. Known as Calamity John, this man from Cornwall has lived a life so packed with accidents, injuries, and near misses that it seems less like a biography and more like a medical textbook of everything that can possibly go wrong with the human body. His story isn't one of supernatural misfortune, but of a seemingly endless, almost comical stream of mundane bad luck. A lifetime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, over and over and over again. His catalog of calamities began in his childhood. As a boy, he fell from a horse-drawn cart and broke his arm. It was a painful but not entirely uncommon childhood accident. But for John, it was just the opening entry in a very long list. A few years later, he fell out of a tree and broke the same arm again. After recovering, he was riding his bike when he collided with a delivery van, breaking, you guessed it, the same arm for a third time. The bone had barely healed when he fell down a manhole. As he entered adulthood, his luck didn't improve. It diversified. In his late teens, he decided to become a miner. On his very first day on the job, a rockfall occurred, and a large stone fell on his shoulder, dislocating it. He left the mining profession. He then got a job as a bus conductor. One day, the bus he was on was involved in a serious accident. He was thrown from the top deck, breaking his leg, arm, and shoulder. The list goes on, a relentless litany of pain. He was struck by lightning on a golf course, a minor one compared to Sullivan or Summerford, but he still made the list. He was bitten by a weasel. He had 3 separate car crashes in a single year, writing off each car. He fell off a ladder while painting and broke his pelvis. He once tried to fix his television aerial, fell through the roof of his house, and landed on the floor below. He even managed to get his false teeth stuck in his throat while eating a pickled onion. By the time he reached his 50s, he had documented over 16 major accidents. He had broken dozens of bones, suffered concussions, burns, and dislocations. His body was a roadmap of his misfortune. Yet through it all, John Lyne maintained a surprisingly cheerful and pragmatic disposition. He seemed to accept his fate as the world's most accident-prone man with a shrug and a smile. He became a local legend, his latest mishap often making the local papers. What makes John Lyne's story so compelling is its sheer volume and mundanity. He wasn't struck by meteorites or fighting off sharks. He was falling down holes, crashing his car, and tripping over things. His is a more relatable, if extreme, form of bad luck. He's a walking, talking embodiment of Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and it will probably happen to John Lyne. His life is a testament to human durability. Despite being broken, burned, bitten, and bruised time and again, he simply kept going. He is living proof that sometimes, the greatest luck of all is simply the ability to survive your own consistently terrible luck. Kostas Mitsotakis, the man who luck forgot. The final story is not one of physical disaster or cosmic assault. It's a tale of a quieter, more psychological, and perhaps more brutal kind of bad luck. It's the story of Kostas Mitsotakis, the one man in the tiny Spanish village of Sodeto who didn't become a millionaire overnight. His story is about being on the very edge of incredible fortune and watching it pass you by, a unique and painful form of misfortune that money can't fix. For decades, the residents of Sodeto, a small, struggling farming village in rural Spain, had a tradition. Every year, the local homemakers association would go door to door, selling tickets for Spain's massive Christmas lottery, El Gordo, the fat one. It was a communal act, a shared hope. They would buy a large number of tickets with the same 5-digit number, and almost every single one of the 250 residents would buy a share. It was a tradition that bound them together. In 2011, the number they chose was 58268. The Homemakers Association went about their business, knocking on every door in the village. They sold tickets to the farmers, the mechanics, the retirees, and the bar owners. They knocked on every single door, except one. For some reason, they missed the home of Kostas Mitsotakis. Mitsotakis, a Greek filmmaker, had moved to the village years earlier, renovating an old barn and looking for a quiet life. He was a resident, but perhaps still seen as a bit of an outsider. Or perhaps it was just a simple, fateful oversight. On December 22, 2011, the numbers for El Gordo were drawn, and the grand prize winning number was 58268. The news spread through Sodeto like wildfire. The village had hit the jackpot. Every single ticket was a winner. The total prize pool for the village was over 100 million euros. It was a transformative, fairy tale event. Hard-up farmers suddenly had their mortgages paid off. Young people could afford to stay in the village instead of moving to the city. The local bar was filled with champagne and tears of joy. Generations of financial struggle were wiped out in an instant. The entire village, some 70 households, was celebrating. Everyone, that is, except Kostas Mitsotakis. As the celebrations erupted around him, he was approached by a neighbor who asked him, "Didn't you buy a ticket?" It was only then that he realized what had happened. He was the only person in the entire village who didn't have a share of the winning number. He had been forgotten. His story quickly became a media sensation, a strange human interest footnote to the feel-good story of the lucky village. Reporters flocked to Sodeto to interview the one man who luck had completely ignored. He described driving away from his house as the champagne corks were popping, seeing the joyous celebrations, and feeling a profound sense of isolation. It wasn't about greed or envy, he insisted. It was about the strange, lonely feeling of being the only one left out of a collective dream come true. His is a unique form of unluckiness. He didn't break any bones or get struck by lightning. He was simply overlooked. He stood on the shore while a tidal wave of good fortune washed over everyone around him. In a strange way, his story is a poignant reminder that luck isn't just about what happens to you. It's also about what doesn't happen to you. To be the sole resident of the luckiest village on earth is, ironically, to be the unluckiest man in town. While his neighbors were buying new tractors and planning vacations, Kostas Mitsotakis was left with nothing but a truly unbelievable story about the day fortune knocked on every door but his.